Welcome to Behaviorally Speaking, Leadership for Changemakers, the podcast where we explore how behavior shapes leadership. I'm your host, Dr. Esther Bubb, and this episode is brought to you by Esther C ABA Services. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Ashlee Brown, scholar, researcher, and educator in the field of special education and systems leadership. Her journey, from classroom teacher to administrator to higher education leader and researcher and parent navigating the system herself, offers powerful lessons about purposeful leadership and human behavior. So let's dive in. Dr. Brown, thank you so much for joining me today to chat about resetting the special education system. Having said that, Dr. Brown, how are you feeling coming into today's conversation?
Well, first and foremost, I'll say, Dr. Bubb, it is an honor and a pleasure to be here with you always. You know, I always enjoy our time together. So what am I bringing with me today? That's potentially a loaded question.
Yes.
I'm teasing. I'm bringing a lot of things. This is a busy time of year, although it's funny. I think we can say that in any season of the year. It always seems to be busy, but it's good busy. Work is busy. Home is busy. So I can't complain. And with that, I suppose I'll say I'm bringing some gratitude with me. I'm genuinely happy to spend my Saturday morning, a beautiful Saturday morning with you. I'm grateful for where I'm at in my career. I honestly think I'm in a chapter of my life, Dr. Bubb, that I wish I could pause and replay over and over. So filled with gratitude and happy to be here.
Wonderful. I'm happy to hear. And I'm going to be very candid. I'm bringing curiosity. I'm curious to hear what you're going to say, curious and eager to learn from our conversation today. So once again, thank you for being here.
Absolutely.
So let's begin our conversation, Dr. Brown, by focusing on setting the stage, right? And why a reset is needed. So from your perspective, Dr. Brown, as a scholar, a researcher, a practitioner, all that jazz, what signals tell us that the current special education system isn't just trained, but it is structurally misaligned with student needs?
Yeah, this is a wonderful question, and I think an important one to start the conversation. And I'll be a little vulnerable, and, it's hard for me. Of course, I'm utilizing my lens as a previous teacher, a previous administrator, for probably about 12 years. And then, recently in my latest role in higher education, but I can't help because it's part of me, infuse my lens as a mother as well. And I'm, a mother who has children in the school system. And so you may hear some of that creep up throughout, and I'll try my best to keep it in check, but it's part of who I am. So it's sort of challenging to do that.
Totally okay.
Okay. So with that said, I think there's a number of things here, a number of signals. I'm going to focus on two that I think are the loudest, or the most obvious. And the first is the teacher and workforce shortage issue. We know that that's an issue across the nation. It's also an issue within our state. I think the data from 23-24 school year creeping into 24-25 showed just over 2,000 vacancies across the state. A large portion of those are in the space of special education. A large portion of those vacancies are concentrated in areas where we serve historically marginalized kids, districts that are underfunded. And so for me, that's an extremely loud or obvious signal, and I think something that we really need to pay attention to. I'm grateful to be in a state where there is quite a bit of attention being paid to the workforce shortage. Yeah. There are lots of programs and grant projects and efforts being focused on alleviating this particular issue. With that said, it's a major signal for me. And, I think it's being fueled by sort of two major things. The first is retention challenges. And then the second is a lack of a pipeline. And so, we see less and less numbers of individuals being interested in entering the field of education, particularly special education. And then simultaneously, we are having major issues with retention, and we're seeing high turnover rates. I pulled some data that was just really overwhelming to me. In the 22-23 school year, we had about 9,000 teachers leave the profession, and only about 5,600 entering through the Instructional One pipeline. Wow, right? I mean, that's incredible to me. And it's loud and it's extremely concerning. And one final piece that I'll add to this sort of first signal is a consequence of that has been this increase in the issuance of emergency certifications in a variety of areas, but concentrated in the space of special ed. And so we have learners with the most complex needs often being supported by folks who are very new to the space. So, for me, that's a massive issue and a signal that something is happening here. And again, I'm grateful for all of the efforts that we're placing to, into and focus on alleviating the issue. At the same time, if I'm being transparent with you, Dr. Bubb, I'm not confident we fully understand the underlying issues. And so there are times where I worry we are addressing the symptoms and some of the others, but not necessarily getting to the core of what's going on here.
That really is a good point. So hearing you say all of that, Dr. Brown, right? And when we say the special education system reset, you talked about the pipeline, you talked about the skills, right? What does that mean in practice, right? Are we talking about reforming parts of the system, or are we really focusing on fundamentally redesigning how special education itself operates?
Well, and I think I definitely have some thoughts on that, but there's one final thing in terms of signals. I hope you don't mind me stepping back just quickly that I wanted to mention. So there's the workforce issues, which, from my perspective, represent the experiences and the voices of the educators, but there's also the voices of families and other stakeholders that I think are equally as loud. And that comes through for me in the staggering numbers of dispute resolution requests. I mean, we are also through the roof and at historic highs in terms of written state complaints, due process requests, mediation. And not only are we at historic highs, but we can't keep up. There's so much data to show that our compliance with resolution within timelines is slipping, is dropping. And so, from my perspective, the workforce shortage issues working in combination with this dispute resolution really is representation of our most significant stakeholders. It's educators and families. And so those are for me the two largest signals. With that said, thinking about the reset. I want to be very clear that in no way, shape, or form do I mean or am I suggesting an abandoning of special education as a systemic structure. You know me very well. I align myself very, very closely, and I am very, very passionate about the core tenets of our regulations. FAPE, LRA, parental participation, procedural safeguards, all of the major principles are absolutely critical. And so in no way, shape, or form am I suggesting that we abandon those structures. What I am potentially suggesting is a pause. How do we pause for a moment? How do we look at some of these signals, the workforce shortage? For a while there, we had folks were calling it a mass exodus of special ed administrators. Right? The voices of families. How do we pause for a moment, breathe through that, and listen to our most significant stakeholders to ensure that we're addressing the underlying issues? Again, I'm not fully confident that we know what they are. And if we do, I'm not fully confident that all of our efforts are designed to alleviate those very specific challenges and issues. And I think some of that is rooted in what we're going to be talking about today, redesigning the contingencies and shifting from this heavy compliance-based system, one that focuses more on relationship, one that focuses more on student learning and outcomes.
I like that. From compliance to learning.
Yes.
All right. So from your perspective, Dr. Brown, what are the most persistent systemic structures in special education that do not serve students or families well?
This is a tough one. I'm going to ask that you weigh in too. The first thing that comes to mind for me is, and I don't I don't want to say the wrong thing. I sort of think of it as like this gatekeeping phenomenon, right? And where my parent lens comes in. And I think, I had a daughter with some needs as well. And so I sat on the other side of the table for a period of time in my life as a parent. Right. And, there is a desperation that's associated with sitting on that side of the table. My heart and soul is invested in this human being and my worry is so great as a parent, and you have what I need. Yes. I mean, that's sort of what it feels like. And then, sitting on the other side of the table, we are concerned with many things, of course, with many, many children, but resources and et cetera, et cetera. And so that can manifest, I think, at least in my humble opinion, in sort of this gatekeeping phenomenon. Yes. That automatically impacts relationships, or it can automatically impact relationship. Yeah. And
from my perspective, I feel like I hear families say we're invited in, but not heard.
Yeah. Yes.
And so, right. So a big thing for me, in the past few years has been family engagement. But what I also keep saying, the one word that I hear come up in every single episode is listening. So listening to them, understanding their perspective. And just like you said, as a mom sitting from the other perspective, the other side of the table, like putting ourselves in their shoes, trying to think beyond just what we're hearing, thinking beyond what they're saying and what is it that they really want us to hear, right? Looking and listening, Ashlee, just not to their verbal behaviors, what they're saying non-verbally, the facial expressions, like, the movements, all of those things. So understanding that whole conversation and interaction fully, and really being curious and inquisitive and asking so we can really understand. And I think a lot of it is perspectives, backgrounds, their knowledge. And I think if we were as a system, as a group, as a culture, to really focus in a lot more on those things, that can help us move from just focusing on compliance, right? Obviously, we have to focus on compliance. There's FAPE, there's LRE. But is our compliance appropriate? Is it meaningful? Is it helpful? Is it making a difference? Those are some of the things that come to mind for me.
It's so important. Honestly, if I'm being open with you, I have butterflies hearing you say that, because I've seen the same things in my work. And I think, what you're talking about, active listening for the message, rather than just the words. I wonder if that happens at times because we're shaped to function in that way, because we don't necessarily have the resources to address the full underlying needs. It's a very challenging position to be in.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Right.
I also think, Dr. Brown, of like placement defaulting. So we default to a particular placement because this is what we have. But what does the child need? We have to provide what the child needs, what the family needs, and find a way, right, to make that happen.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. And it's funny you say that. That comes up with pre-service students quite a bit as a curiosity also. Yeah. So, but what happens if it's not available? Well, we have to make it available, right? And therein lies the magic. Therein lies the challenge.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Wonderful. So then how do, I feel like a lot of what we just talked about, Dr. Brown, has to do with leadership. So how do leadership decisions at the district level, the state level, the institutional level, the college level, right, really shape the daily realities of special education more than individual teacher skill alone?
Yeah, that's another wonderful question. And I love that you're referring to the layers of leadership and really the layers of regulation in special ed. I mean, it's what makes it so complex. I think our work on a day-to-day basis, the operationalization of all of those things, on the day-to-day basis. But with that said, I think leadership decisions, priorities tell us where we focus our energy and where we focus our time. So naturally it structures contingencies, it shapes our behavior. And so if we have a system that is so heavily focused on compliance, then compliance we shall achieve.
Yes.
Right? And does that always equate to meaning? Sometimes yes. Maybe even many times yes.
Yeah.
But I would argue, not in every situation.
Exactly. And I also think teachers operate within contingencies that they didn't design, right?
Yes.
They didn't design it. Leadership, we set the reinforcement schedule. So the question is really like, how do we rearrange how we set and establish and deliver and implement those contingencies,
Yes.
Yeah.
100%.
So Dr. Brown, why now? Why is it important to address these issues now by resetting the stage?
Yeah, I think for many of the reasons we've already discussed, the workforce is speaking to us and loudly, families are speaking to us and loudly, honestly, even kids. In every program that I support or I'm observing in, challenging behavior is the number one concern.
Yes.
And behavior is communication. And so I would argue we are receiving a very clear message from educators, from administrators also, from families and from kids, that something isn't quite fitting here.
Yeah.
And then, just like you, I do consider myself an advocate for kids through and through. And so I think there's always an urgency when it comes to kids. When we're talking about our kids, we're talking about our future. And so I think there's always an urgency here. And so now is a better time than ever.
Yeah. And, Dr. Brown, culturally, regionally, internationally, nationally, whatever, families are more informed. Information is out there. They're more knowledgeable than before. So they can challenge, right? And they can say, these are the expectations. This is what you're supposed to be doing. Transparency is higher. So why not take the front, right? Put ourselves out there first and start resetting, start reframing, start changing so that we're doing right by, we're doing justice by, we're doing good by, right? All of those interested in our care.
Yep. No, it's the truth. A previous mentor of mine, and I'm going to butcher it now, in the moment, used to say something along the lines of, the only way to get comfortable being uncomfortable is to be uncomfortable, right? There's no way around that. You really do. You have to sit in it and have hard conversations. But to your point, leadership is having hard conversations. I think leadership is leaning into the discomfort, and sitting with that and modeling for your staff and your people how to do that, right? And of course, there's a number of things that go along with that: humility, curiosity, a lot of the things that we've already been chatting about this morning. But I agree with you. I think we do have to be courageous and lean in.
Yes. Yeah, lean in. I like that. Yes. All right, Dr. Brown. So let's chat a bit about IEPs, incentives, behavioral contingencies, and adult decision making. So you've studied both behavior and you've studied systems. How do reinforcement, Dr. Brown, and punishment contingencies influence adult behaviors, right, in special education, but particularly teachers and administrators?
Yeah. So behavior science tells us that we repeat behaviors that are reinforced and we avoid behaviors that are punished, right? And so in special ed systems, I think we learn very quickly which decisions lead to social approval, which decisions lead to conflict, right? And I think we learn really quickly. Excuse me.
It's okay.
And so I would say, as a system, I think we tend to reinforce behaviors that avoid conflict. I mean, going back to even some of the dispute resolution data, right? It's a very uncomfortable, a very stressful position to be in. Most of us got into this field because we love children, we love families. Our goal is to partner with kids and families. And so it feels unnatural sometimes, I think, to be in that position, especially for newer teachers or newer administrators. It can be very uncomfortable. And so I think we tend to reinforce a wide array of behaviors that avoid conflict and decision making that avoids conflict. And maybe that includes behaviors like recommending feasible service recommendations, or to your point earlier, certain placement decisions and placement recommendations and those sorts of things. And then on the flip side, I think we naturally tend to punish, and I use that term behaviorally, not sort of we naturally tend to punish things that lead to conflict, and decisions and behaviors that lead to resource strain, recommending service recommendations that are not feasible, and that sort of thing. So I think there's a lot of that at play here that over time shapes educator behavior.
Yeah, you're 100% right, Dr. Brown. So adults are human, right? And regardless of who we are, regardless of whether we know it's happening, right, we do what's reinforced. So If we, along this line of thinking, Dr. Brown, if we view IEP development, right, as a behavior, what behaviors are currently being reinforced for educators and which ones are being punished even when those consequences run counter to student needs?
Yeah, that is a wonderful question. So I think largely, I believe this, and I'm also very curious to hear from you. I think largely we reinforce, and again, because it's an emphasis, because it's we reinforce compliance, timelines, documentation, sometimes over meaningful progress and and genuine learning, like we touched on earlier.
Yeah.
A case comes to mind for that. I think Doug C versus Hawaii. I want to say 2013.
Okay.
Very interesting case. I may be off on the year. I believe 2013. But very interesting case where a district, and there's a lot of context. There always is. There's a lot of context here. So I'm sort of just giving high level summary. But there was some back and forth with the parent on scheduling the meeting. The parent couldn't make the meeting. The team moved forward with the meeting date anyway because the vast majority of the professional team were available. Some extremely important decisions were made in that meeting, including shifting a child's placement from a private placement back into district. And so it eventually made its way through the layers of due process and the layers of the courts until ultimately it made its way to the Supreme Court. And, the defense of the district as a previous administrator makes a lot of sense to me. We had to hold the meeting. We had rescheduled it multiple times. I believe their language was something to the tune of, the IEP was about to lapse, meaning that the annual date was forthcoming rapidly and they were concerned about the lapse of the IEP. And, as an administrator, that does speak to me. Compliance is critical, right? It's a major avenue for evaluation of us as individuals, of our programs. But ultimately it was decided that, efforts that get at compliance, but that don't get to the meaning and the substantive the quality elements of programming for kids cannot be justified. Right? And so, the parent prevailed in that the genuine involvement and partnership and meaningful input from the parent trumped compliance in that particular situation. Yeah. And that is just so powerful to me.
That is.
I don't think it's a case we talk about frequently enough.
No.
But it speaks to, I'm sorry, go ahead, please.
No, so I think, along the lines of what you're saying, the IEP then becomes sort of like a risk management document instead of like a learning blueprint, right?
Yes.
So just exactly what you said in that case, like, let's check all the boxes, but are we really, we talked about meaningful, we talked about appropriate. Are we really designing a document, a program, a plan, supports, services, placement that really promote learning? Yep. Or are we just trying to dot our I's and cross our T's?
Yeah, no, it's absolutely correct. And again, thinking about that at its most basic form, we reinforce adherence to timelines. Maybe the document isn't quite there yet. Maybe we were waiting for the results from one more assessment, or there was a piece of information from the parent we didn't quite get yet, but the IEP must be finalized, right?
Yes.
And so, I absolutely agree with that. And I think to a certain point, and I think this may be a future question, so I don't want to get ahead of us, but I think that reinforces or promotes standardization at times versus genuine individualization, which I think is also the point you were just trying to make.
Yeah. So in saying all of that, Dr. Brown, how do we shift contingencies, right? Because IEPs are intended to be individualized, support meaningful progress, but a lot of times recommendations don't fully support that need or reflect student needs because of everything we've just been talking about. So from a behavioral standpoint, what contingencies are operating to maintain this pattern? And I'm asking you this question, but I'm remembering from our experience sitting through very long IEPs, 3 hours, And so I'm asking you, like, what contingencies are operating to maintain this pattern? I think compliance is one, or broadly speaking, because I think of Ashlee, Dr. Brown, instead of just sitting through a 3-hour meeting or 4-hour meeting, how about pausing, right? As you said, and let's reschedule, let's reconvene, right? Let's meet the family, let's meet the student. But oftentimes the compliance makes us just, okay, let's just keep having this meeting. Let's just, finish anyway. What contingencies from your perspective maintain this pattern?
Honestly, Dr. Bubb, I think you just said it. That's exactly where my head was. And it's funny, I'm taking a quick peek at my notes, but time constraints was really on the top of it, is an example and sort of representative of other elements of compliance that are really on the top of my list.
Yeah.
Compliance is reinforced, and rightfully so. I'm certainly not suggesting that we should go rogue and be non-compliant. But that's certainly not what I'm suggesting here. I'm just, again, suggesting that reset. If we can pause this through a little bit, how do we prioritize those things?
Yeah.
So I think, sometimes this compliant driven and all of the related elements of being so compliance driven are so strongly reinforced that we lose.
Yeah. Yeah. So some of the things that also, Dr. Brown, templates.
Oh, right.
Goal banks.
Yes.
Copy and paste.
Yes.
The time constraints, as you said, fear of parent disagreement. So we're going to do this just, we just, caseload size, all of those things, I believe are things that are operating. And, sometimes, I shouldn't say often, in reviewing documents, we'll see like an incorrect name or, things like that.
Yes.
But again, going back to just the whole issue of the compliance and let's get this done instead of focusing on what are we really trying to do here? What do we really need to do, right?
Oh, it's so true. And, I'll give you, and I love that you talked about fear, and I know we're going to get there because that's just an incredible motivator. But I can share with you some of my current work is in looking at the early childhood community and the implementation of IEPs at that preschool level in the general education space, which looks very different than the K-12 general education space.
Yes, very much so.
That could be a whole nother episode. Maybe we chat about it.
Yes.
But to the point of standardization and to your goal banks, SDI banks, all of those things, I do tend to see a lot of non-contextually specific IEPs. And so strategies, just, reinforcement, general reinforcement or prompting, sort of like, these overarching descriptors of procedures or strategies without actually individualizing them and contextualizing them for the space. And what does that take? It takes a heck of a lot of time to do really well, right? Particularly in a system like the early childhood special ed system, where at least where we are, they are not governed by the same entities, right? So you don't have that natural infusion of the gen ed and special ed environment like you do in a K-12 structure. Yeah. So it's, I'm just going to the point of and thinking about like all of those things and how they manifest on the day to day. But what does that result in? It results in non-contextually specific IEPs. And how helpful is that? How meaningful is that?
Yeah. And how harmful is it? Right.
Right. Oh, God. Scarier question.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. So, staying on this tangent, how does fear of conflict, Dr. Brown? So fear of conflict with leadership, with families, with, funding limitations, right? Things like litigation, things like conflict, things like the budget. How does that fear, right, function as a controlling variable in IEP development and placement decisions?
Yeah. I mean, I think fear is an incredibly powerful thing. It's an incredibly powerful motivator. And if we're all honest with ourselves, if we can spend a moment, there are times we avoid, right? I mean, if we're just being frank with ourselves, we tend to avoid behaviors that we know will lead to conflict. We just naturally do that, even when it's hard, even maybe when it's the right thing. And again, we are all human. That's but, I mean, I think that's it. I think we avoid behaviors that tend to result in conflict, and we move towards behaviors that avoid it. It's just as simple as that. And that looks like a lot of the things that we've already spoken about. It might also look like being more inclined to recommend a placement that, a parent might be happy with, or, rather than doing the hard thing, which is having a really honest conversation and a collaborative conversation about a recommendation that may not be received well, but utilizing evidence and data and, following, relying on the why, right? And in no way, shape, or form do I see this as like a top-down approach. What I say goes. Absolutely not. Yeah. It's still a collaborative decision on behalf of a child, and quite frankly, a child that belongs to someone else. You know what I mean? It's the parents. And so I fully respect that process, but I think at times, we tend to even avoid those really hard conversations because they are uncomfortable. And to your previous point, they also tend to take a lot of time.
Yeah.
You have to ensure that your data is impeccable. Your systems are compliant. You have the evidence that you need to justify the recommendation. And it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of time to do that really well.
Yeah. And just as you said, Dr. Brown, fear operates as an establishing operation, right? A motivating operation. And then I think of courage, on the other hand, it's a skill. So it makes me think, as you're talking, Dr. Brown, of the due process, right? You mentioned like due process, right? I think of it as like a postmortem, right? So how about if we did like a premortem? Let's take this IEP, look at what might make it fail, right? And make those changes before we even put it out there,
Right.
Before we finalize it, things like that. So how can we be more proactive, right? So more antecedent based, Dr. Brown, as opposed to, right, consequent based. I think if we're able to support our teams using some of those strategies, we could see a lot of things start to change and reset.
Yes, absolutely. But there has to be how do I want to say this? There has to be a safe space established in order for staff to be vulnerable in that way. I have found, and this has been hard for me to swallow, there is a lot of blame. I think it's because of, the high levels of stress, high workload, the contingencies that are structured, that are put into place, right? And so there tends to be a lot of blame when it comes to conflict and these issues. And, whether it's due process requests or however they manifest.
Yes.
But there tends to be blame, and I've sat in that seat where I've been frustrated. I've also sat in the seat where I've potentially been to blame. It's a very challenging and uncomfortable position to be in, and it creates an environment that doesn't support psychological safety. And so we may not see the level of honesty or vulnerability that's necessary to really get at some of this because of those contingencies that are at play.
Yeah, that is so true. We have to create a safe space.
Yes.
Yeah. So Dr. Brown, so far so good, for our conversation today. Let's shift a bit to full-time inclusion, right?
Okay.
Such a wonderful topic, and examine whether it's an ideal, is it an ideology, or is it illusion, right? So full-time inclusion, Dr. Brown, is often framed as an unquestionable best practice. And there's been a massive push for full-time inclusion, often without adequate personnel, training, or support. So what concerns you when inclusion becomes a placement goal rather than an access and a progress goal?
Yeah, I think I think that is exactly what concerns me. So I tend to look at inclusion as much more than geography, which, let's be frank, geography is part of it, right? And physical access is important. Physical access is incredible, and I would argue to some extent the reason that lives in our regulations is because how children with disabilities were historically segregated from society, right? That comes from a very real experience and a very real error, on our behalf. So I think the geography piece is absolutely critical. I think it's important. I think it's a fundamental right. Simultaneously, I think children have the fundamental right to meaningful educational benefit and meaningful educational progress. And so, it would be a mistake for us to say, for example, to assess compliance data about the number of children that are included, and to utilize that as a benchmark or marker for actual access to instruction and meaningful learning simultaneously. That would be a genuine mistake on our behalf. And so I think that is a really good example of how, surface level compliance analysis could potentially be harmful. Harmful to kids.
And I think of, go ahead.
No, please go ahead.
Okay. I think of, we talk a lot, Dr. Brown, about personal care assistants, right? So PCA does not equal behavior change, right? And it makes me think of physical proximity or inclusion does not equal instructional access. So I can place you here all I want. And, you're in the building, geographically speaking. It doesn't mean that you're accessing instruction. Yeah. And I think that's a critical question we have to answer.
Yeah, it is. The question is, shifting, I think, from is the child physically in the classroom to is the student learning in a meaningful way?
Yeah.
And what's so challenging about that, in my opinion, Dr. Bubb, is the individualization of that.
Yes.
There's no standardized assessment you can use to determine if that's happening, right?
Yes. Yes.
And meaning is different for every child. Meaningful is different for every child. It's it's like appropriate, right?
Yes. Yeah.
The bane of our existence, such a challenging word to define, but meaningful is going to look different for every child, for every family. And I believe that it should look different for every child and for every family. I fully believe, and one of my most exciting things to teach is family engagement. How do you partner with a family, link arms with a family, walk beside a family, and shift from this traditional pathology view of disability where I'm going to come in and save the day? Absolutely not. I'm going to come in and we're going to partner and work through this together as a team. And I'm going to be working on or supporting efforts that are, meaningful to you and socially significant to you as a family. And so I think that that's what makes it so challenging to accomplish, is because it is extremely challenging to assess and it's extremely challenging to measure.
Yeah. I think of, LRE as the legal thing to do, right? It's compliance. Mm-hmm. But then when we think of, is it appropriate, right? We think of achievement, we think of success, we think of progress, we think of family inclusion, as you just mentioned. So saying all of that, Dr. Brown, from a leadership lens, right? How do some systems confuse physical inclusion with meaningful inclusion? And why is that distinction so critical?
Yeah, I think that happens very naturally because of the assessment processes we have in place. I think we look at straight surface level inclusion data to some extent. And I know there are efforts to get a little deeper, but are they representative enough of the whole? I would argue probably not. And again, that's because of the complexities associated with analyzing this and really getting to this at the individual level. It's critical because when placement or geography is treated at the ultimate goal, I don't believe we're serving kids well. It potentially even harm in some situations. I have been in a lot of classrooms where, yes, we're checking the box, the kiddo is included, but is the kiddo included? No, we know that. And how do we alleviate that issue? And to that point, I don't think we have the formula. We're very lucky and fortunate to work in a field where there is an incredible amount of evidence, and the research and the literature is evolving constantly and giving us, these beautiful nuggets of how to teach well, but we know that they're not always landing in practice. And with that said, I still don't think we have the full picture or the formula for making these inclusionary efforts effective in a wide array of contexts. What resources are actually needed to fully embrace the UDL model? What level of training, right? Like we don't have the formula.
Yeah, exactly. And we don't have the formula at this point, Dr. Brown, to make sure that access, participation, and progress is happening meaningfully at the level it should for every single student, right?
Correct.
So to your point, we have to answer larger questions. What training, what resources, what do we need to give to our teams? How can we support our families to make sure that, yes, the child is in an inclusionary or inclusive setting, but are they accessing instruction? Can they participate? And are they making progress? Because you're in the classroom doesn't mean you're present, right? Doesn't mean you're participating. So it makes me think of behavior analytically, we're exposing them to the stimuli, the environment, but they're not accessing instruction. There's no instructional access in that environment.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. And I think that actually also makes me think about some of the principles of ABA and single case research design and how in single case design we emphasize the behavior of the individual and behavioral change of the individual. And, that's, of course, very different than other research methods that are looking at large scale averages and aggregates of data and trying to understand the average experience. And in single case design, we are really looking at behavioral change associated with the individual. It's just interesting to me. And I wish we were at the point of utilizing more of that mindset in the space of special education. And that's a massive undertaking, right? I mean, talk about resources, but it does come up for me in this conversation. And I think one more thing to your previous point, acknowledging that perhaps placement data looks favorable, but but that some students aren't adequately accessing, is a really hard conversation to have, right? There's a lot of, again, humility, admitting being human, admitting that we have come a really long way. I mean, we should be celebrating our progress. We have done some incredible things in the last, didn't we just have the 50th actually anniversary of the IDEA? I think we did. And so celebrating all of our progress and simultaneously acknowledging we're not fully living out our vision just yet, and we still have a ways to go.
Yeah. It makes me also think, this is branching out the conversation a little bit of diversity, right? So we may say we're checking all the blocks, we're including diverse students, but is every single diverse student at this school accessing, right? So it's just to me that same concept. So when we think along those lines, Dr. Brown, how would leadership teams, or how should leadership teams define success with inclusion? And how does that definition shift when actual student progress data is examined?
Yeah. So I think that the answer to this is a little bit like our single case design conversation, analyzing meaningful outcomes at the individual level. And I don't say that without acknowledging the incredible effort that and the reset and potentially even the redesign of the system that would need to happen in order for that to occur. But if we're being completely frank, that is the benchmark of success when it comes to that. And so, I acknowledge we are not there yet. I acknowledge that we have a lot of competing priorities, this being one of them. And so I don't necessarily have the full answer here, but I think that analyzing student progress on an individual level, fully including families in the process, would be the benchmark of success in that regard. And we certainly have a ways to go.
Yeah. It makes me think, Dr. Brown, of defining that we have to define success for each child before placement, right? So it's like the needs then drive that. And I think if we can do that, then we're able to attach reinforcers, right, that are more likely to make the child successful before the child gets there. Is it that whole thing of really going back to your word of meaningful, right, for the child and the family? What does that mean? Now let's drive that with, the IEP, the goals, the SEIs, the placements, and let's just surround the child and the family with reinforcers so they're more likely to be successful.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. And then which contingencies are or are not in place in order to make that happen, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Hence this conversation today.
Exactly. So on your point, to your point, Dr. Brown, what contingencies maintain this narrative that inclusion is always the answer, right? Even when outcomes suggest otherwise.
I think there's social phenomena.
Okay.
Here, in my humble opinion, there's social punishment procedures happening and social reinforcement procedures happening, and so I think this is a social thing. I think some of it is also the data. Data can be very powerful when it's presented accurately and in context, right? Yeah. And so, if we are looking at, 80% of kiddos are, included, or I'm kind of making that up on the fly, but, and these are some of the positive outcomes that are happening at large across our system. And, I think the brain automatically connects the dots. Wow, more kids are graduating, more kids are getting a job because of this, when we don't necessarily know that there's a causal relationship there, and quantitative data, despite being a quantitative individual, it doesn't paint the full picture, and there's a qualitative element to this that, and that I think is becoming apparent through, again, going the workforce shortage issues, educators leaving the field, family dissatisfaction, and those sorts of things. It's helping to tell the story. Yeah. So I think there's, something happening here with the presentation of the data and maybe even assumptions. Yeah. As human beings, we all make assumptions. Our brains are extremely powerful. They connect the dots where the dots don't connect themselves naturally,
Exactly. And you mentioned social, and I feel like social approval, public perceptions, right? Dr. Brown can function as generalized reinforcement. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So if we say we're inclusive, we're appeasing the public, right? Yeah. But do we have documented progress, as you've been saying, to support this, this model of inclusion, and I think those are the questions we have to answer.
And again, they're hard conversations to have. It goes
Yes.
back to effective leadership, which we've been talking about throughout. Transparent leadership, honest leadership, courageous leadership.
Yeah. So how do we change the conversation, Dr. Brown, or how do we shift the focus from where is the student placed, right, to is the student making progress and is the student accessing the curriculum? How do we change this narrative?
I think this will require a reset. I really do.
Yeah.
I think it requires a thoughtful and strategic pause.
Yeah.
I think it requires active listening to your point from earlier, receiving feedback from all stakeholders. I think this is where part of that reset really comes in, because we have to shift from being compliance driven and in a lot of ways compliance sophisticated, right? Like we really are. There are layers and layers of regulation and compliance and procedures and things like that in the space of special ed. And so we are compliance driven, but we've also come a long way. We're very compliance sophisticated, at least to some extent. But are we placing that much emphasis on quality and meaning like you and I have been talking throughout? And I would argue we have room to grow there. And so I think for me, this is where that real pause, get some more information, understand the underlying issues, get clear on what our goal is too, right? Like, is our goal physical place? Is our goal geography, or is our goal meaningful access? We need to start sort of operationalizing the end goal a little bit more here, right?
And I think too of just making something as student progress like a standing item on agenda. So whatever level of the organization we're having a meetings, it doesn't really matter, but that we're always talking about that. And even if it's 5 minutes, 3 minutes, 2 minutes, whatever, it doesn't really matter. But can we just make that a standing item, right? On a standing agenda item. So we're always talking about progress in some way. We're always inquisitive about it. What can we do differently? What's happening? Things like that. Even like a progress dashboard, so people can see the visualization of it,
Yes, it's so important. And honestly, the amount of talent we have in this community, holy moly, I am honored to be a part of this community. I really am. The amount of talent we have. And so I think at times just listening to our people, hearing success stories, gathering ideas of the passionate, talented people in this space. There's good stuff there.
Yes.
It's not bubbling to the surface.
It is not. It is not. Yes. And stories are the best. I love stories. Yes. Yeah. They're very meaningful and when they're authentic, right? So let's move our conversation a bit, Dr. Brown, to leadership, ethical responsibility, and system accountability. So what is the role of ethical leadership in disrupting systems that technically meet compliance but fail students substantively?
I think the first step, or a large part of the role is acknowledgement. So again, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but it is having the courage to acknowledge that something isn't working.
Yeah.
And so I think that acknowledgement is a huge piece of this puzzle. And I think transparency is as well. Again, thinking about our data, and we have so much data. I mean, it's absolutely incredible. Being honest and transparent about our data, maybe connecting dots empirically versus letting folks connect them themselves. I think acknowledgement and transparency about our wins, where we've been successful, where we are shining, and then simultaneously acknowledging and being transparent about the gaps.
Yeah. I love that. It makes me think. I'm laughing already. But, like that first score, we all had our first score that we never wanted to give up. We got to acknowledge, sister. Yep, it's done its days. You got to give it up.
Yeah, it's a money pit. Let it go.
Let's go. We got to move on to something that's working. So it just, it's just a funny moment, but it made me think of that. Sometimes we just have to acknowledge. We have to accept the truth, but then do something about it, as you're saying. And it makes me think of, the mantra that compliance is the floor, but learning is the ceiling.
Oh,
right.
I think you made my whole day. That's stunning. Yes, it's absolutely true.
Yeah. So those are some of the things I think of. Dr. Brown, how can leaders use behavioral principles, things like shaping? You've mentioned several of them already, but like shaping, reinforcement, feedback, to support educators instead of controlling them?
Yeah. I want to start off with the importance of relationship. You know me as a leader. I think I know you as a leader. I would argue that to some extent, we always have room for growth, but you and I both appreciate and value and emphasize relationship and leadership.
Yeah.
And to me, that will always be step one. I think about like pairing, establishing rapport. It's the foundation of sort of all clinical training, right? And principles, and rightfully so. And so unless we can establish relationship, create a safe space for educators to fail and grow, shift from surveillance to support, those sorts of things I think are absolutely necessary to push us forward. And then, and then again, I think staff will be more comfortable and open in, analyzing and celebrating their own strengths, analyzing and be willing to take support to address their own gaps. I think that there's a lot of work that has to be done in that, creating a safe space, creating a culture of ongoing learning for us all. I mean, we're an educational system. A recognition that we're all learning and growing, that we're human beings, that we all have strengths, we all have areas for growth. And so I think that does require, again, relationship, creating that safe base, but shifting from a culture of evaluation and surveillance to a culture of coaching and support. And, we don't want teacher behavior to shift just because we're in the classroom. I want to see what's genuinely happening, right? And so that I can reinforce what's going well and help support what needs to change. But there has to be a level of safety and comfort in order to accomplish that, I think.
Yeah. It makes me think of Dr. Brown when being in classrooms, resisting the urge to often jump in, right? Because we both miss it, right? We miss being there doing it.
Shirt off, sweatshirt off, or whatever.
I was always like, all right, just chill, like just let them do their thing, take notes, observe, support. But then just give them the opportunity to be real and natural and authentic. And I feel like, to your point, then we can give the most honest, truest feedback because we're just allowing them to be. It makes me also think of, shaping, but like setting like our small approximations ladder, right? Let's focus on goals, just goals. That's all for now. Then let's think about graphing and let's move from there and just make them feel supported. It makes me think of, even as behavior analyst, Dr. Brown, parents may come to us and these are the 10 things we want to work on. We're like, all right, let's start with 2.
Yes.
Right?
Jack of all trades, master of none.
None.
Yes.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I see that a lot in the educational space too. I think that speaks to feedback both ways. So allowing staff to offer feedback, because I don't know how many times I've seen a school say like, all right, welcome back to a new school year. And this year we have 38 priorities and we're getting a new reading curriculum and we're leading some new math support. And also, by the way, we're having big challenges. So we're leading more heavily into PBIS. And we have all of these things moving, and that's certainly not feasible, if we think about it as learning. So I'm with you 100%, like incrementally.
Yep. So Dr. Brown, I see you as, a strong, authentic leader, right? And what would strong leaders like yourself do differently when data tells them, or when data tells you that a student is included, but, not actually learning? And I feel like I'm asking this questions twofold, like in special education, K to 12, but also, as a professor for adult students, if they're not learning, and what do you do differently? What do you change?
I think, again, going back to relationship, I think strong leaders are present. I think strong leaders have what the straight quantitative data doesn't necessarily offer. And it's a full picture of context and what's happening in the space, and an ongoing assessment of what's going well and what needs to be addressed. And so, from my perspective, strong leaders should have the time to be heavily involved in classrooms and to be supporting teachers in that way, being present, not necessarily relying on teacher report, although absolutely there's deep respect for teacher report, and they're the master of their classroom and the leader of their classroom, but also knowing enough and having a deep enough context to know that yourself and to be able to see that and help diagnose the issue and then help support the teacher in growth. And so I think presence is extremely important, and relationship is part of that too. Even at the higher ed level, relationship is absolutely critical. My students have to feel safe to practice delivering reinforcement and to mess it up, right? I think presence is part of that. Relationship is part of that. and then utilizing a genuine coaching model too. So again, there is a fear of fault, and there is sort of like a blame culture to some extent, right? So the student's not going, well, what are you doing to fix that problem? Right. Rather than partnering with the teacher. And of course, we all need self-reflection. We all have to engage in that process of, okay, well, maybe this is what I'm doing right, but maybe I am missing this. But that immediate response, I think, creates walls, it creates barriers, and it's not a space for anyone to learn and grow, not teachers or not kids.
I think of, you mentioned bidirectional feedback, right? So we give feedback, but we also have to be able to accept it and receive it. So I think of, cognitive flexibility, right? So we might know this, or we understand this concept, or we do it this way, or we've known it this way all of our life. But here is a new approach, right? Let's try it. Let's consider it. And it may come from staff.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
I don't know everything, right? Is what I always say to people. There's no way I know everything. So I'm always willing to listen to new ideas, understand it, right? And give it a try.
Yeah. I think strong leaders want feedback. We seek feedback. Because we know that growth is static. It's ever evolving. So I absolutely agree with that. I think strong leaders are present. I think they have context. I think they've developed meaningful relationships. I think they open the door for feedback to flow in all ways.
So, Dr. Brown, how should leaders, like ourselves, respond when the incentives from the systems conflict with student-centered decision making?
So I have two thoughts here. The first is to advocate. Right. And to lean into the collective. I'll be frank with you. I have met a lot of educators throughout my career. I don't think I've ever met an educator or an administrator that genuinely doesn't want to do right by kids. Behavior has been shaped in a number of ways, but at the core, I don't know that I've ever met someone that doesn't have good intention and that genuinely considers himself to be an advocate for kids. So I think leaning into the collective and advocating, luckily now, there's a lot of attention being placed on education, and rightfully so. There are a lot of ears. And so I think it's also saying it out loud. Right. This is what we're doing well. This is where we need to work on, and being in the right places when you do that. So, I think it's advocacy. I think it's being courageous and leaning into our areas of growth and just having enough humility and courage to say those kinds of things out loud.
It makes me think of like the behavior plan. So as you know, we have to define the behavior, right? We have to name it. We have to define it, right? So let's name the conflict. Let's define it.
Yes. Right. Let's use evidence.
Yes.
To support that assertion. Yes.
Yep. Exactly. And you talked about speaking up, right? Advocacy and silence, Dr. Brown, would maintain that contingency.
Yes.
Right. And I agree with you. Like, I haven't come across an educator that isn't there for the students. It doesn't want the students to improve. But it also makes me think of the why, Dr. Brown. So, how some parents, I'm sure you do not use this, but they would say, because I said so. But I'm a strong component of, I never use that with Michaela. Like, say the why, but you still need to wash the dishes. Like, here's why. Nothing wrong with that. So, we've discovered this. We've named it. We've defined it. We've come up with a plan. And here's why. Here's why we decided to change course. So sharing that, the transparency, Dr. Brown, sharing that with staff, sharing that with parents, whoever the stakeholders are. So they understand the why. I feel like people then become owners, right, of this plan, this thing, whatever it is that we're doing. I think it's so important to explain the why.
It is. And I think it fosters respect and trust. Again, I have worked with a lot of families. I hope some of them hear this. Hi, y'all. I miss you. But I think it's okay to say, families are humans too. It's okay to say, this is what I recommended. Yes. This is what I tried. The data is telling me it didn't work. And so I'm hopeful that you can come back to the table with me to think about it again and to redesign and reset, some of what we put in place. And I have found that my strongest relationships are working through turmoil like that, right? Because we're honest, we're transparent, we have truly linked arms, and and we're in this together. And so I think there's a lot of respect. I think that approach also fosters trust and genuine partnership. And and we all know that this work is too big. Our volume, the amount of work that has to be, we cannot accomplish it alone. We will not accomplish it without the right partnerships.
Yeah. So let's move, Dr. Brown, to another one of your favorite topics, right?
Okay.
Preparing the next generation of educators.
Oh, yeah. Okay, great.
So as a university professor, what gaps do you see between how special educators are trained and the realities they face, Dr. Brown, once they enter the school system?
Yeah. So and I'm so fortunate to work with such a wonderful team. So I will say, I would like to see us lean into and pivot into more of a do model, right? And so in a lot of ways, like mirroring medical field structures and medical field preparation, right, where we're functioning in labs. And I think what's really cool about that is the evolution of AI. I'm a product of my generation, so I am amazed. I am curious. I'm slightly scared. If I'm being honest. But AI allows us to do some really cool things and really, where students are not quite ready yet to be doing with actual K-12 students, where pre-service students are not at that point yet. There are tools becoming available that continue to shape skills in very much of a do model. And so I'm excited for leaning more into a do model. We've been having those conversations amongst my team just recently, a small group of us, and I'm so eager and excited to see where it heads. I also think we potentially need to do a little bit more work in the space of teaching pre-service students how to navigate complex systems. I think about the evolution of my career, and I've been so fortunate in my career, but I would argue it took me a solid decade, and not until I stepped into leadership, until I really started to understand the complexity of this system. And so I find that that's really lacking. The complexity of the special ed system structure and understanding of that is lacking. And then I would add two more things. The first is genuine collaboration with families and conflict resolution, right? There's absolutely conversations about family engagement, but that's an art. I think there's so many things in special ed that are an art and a science, but, and of course family engagement is one of those things, but there is an art to it. And so, for individuals that are newer to the field, I think they can be very intimidated in working with families. I think, that can be a real challenge for them. So I'd like to see us lean into new and creative ways to teach that and to sharpen that skill. And then also conflict resolution, right? I think one might argue at the surface level, like, that in a pre-service teacher preparation program, there's so many other competing priorities that where does that fall on the list? But the prevalence of conflict in the space of education is such that I think it has to be taught. I think there's a real shock when newer teachers, particularly in special education, thinking about some of those stats from earlier about the massive increases. I think we've had something like a 72% increase in the last decade in written state complaints due process requests and mediation. And so it is highly likely that at some point, and probably early on in your career, you are going to contact some level of conflict, formal conflict, right? Not to mention the informal conflict that occurs all day, every day, but just formal conflict in the field. And so I'd like to see us lean into that a little bit more and do more preparation around that. And with that, I think also comes things like leadership behaviors, making independent decisions, being able to make independent decisions, being able to problem solve. Those are some of the more of the soft skills that I think can be challenging to teach in more of a contrived environment. And so being creative and thinking about ways to alleviate those gaps, because we do a tremendous amount of work on how to teach. And I think that that's excellent and absolutely needed, but there are other areas that can impact your ability to teach well that I'm not sure we're addressing.
It makes me think, Dr. Brown, of, a shift from training teachers and educators to function and survive in a classroom as opposed to, surviving and navigating an educational ecosystem, right? That includes everything you just said. There's personal, there's professional conflict, there's conflicts with families. So kind of shifting, our instruction and from theoretical fluency to practical adaptability and systems literacy and things like that. So
Yes.
That's what I see, when educators come, to our jobs and they're new to the field. Those are the things, that then we, in the classrooms or as leaders within schools, then support the students with. So I think if we start shifting some of those things, and for me, I'm just an adjunct, but so I'm able to influence students that way. But I think as professors, regardless of the role, being able to support our students based on our experiences and what we see is lacking in the field.
Absolutely.
And how we can support them best. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, and I tell my students, because it tends to come up fairly frequently in the space of special education, you aren't just supporting and shaping children. You are supporting and shaping and maintaining relationships with adults.
Yeah.
Right. And that is, I think, even in the work you and I have done together over the years, I would put that in the top 3 challenges associated with new classroom teachers in the space of special education is the ability to manage the adults. And special education tends to be an adult heavy space. There are, to your point, personal care assistants, one-to-ones, related service personnel, families. There are a lot of adults in the space, and they are not equipped early on to manage adults. And there's a lot of vulnerability in that and intimidation.
Yeah.
And I think that's really hard for them.
Yeah. So you mentioned terms earlier, being safe, right? Being vulnerable, psychological safety. How do you talked about advocacy, right? Speaking up. How can teacher preparation programs better equip educators to recognize, Ashlee, to speak up, to challenge, right? Not just accept the status quo, but to challenge dysfunctional systems with harmful contingencies within school systems?
Yeah. I think directly teaching advocacy skills and finding voice in appropriate and professional ways is very important. And I will place an emphasis on utilizing appropriate and professional vehicles and methods and that sort of thing as being extremely important. We also, I think, need to teach students how to actively listen. I find a way to infuse that into just about every course I teach.
Yeah.
This is what active listening is. This is what it means. And let's practice that. Right. And so we actually even go through an exercise where I have them engage in a conversation while they are checking their phone, reading a text message, scrolling. I don't think anybody scrolls Facebook anymore. That might just be us, but you get the point. Right. And then the difference between sitting with a human being, maintaining eye contact, right, and being fully engaged in the conversation, hearing more than just the words, but the message, and what a night and day experience that is.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think part of advocacy is speaking out, calling things out. I think that it's balanced with active listening.
Yeah.
Right. And almost even leading with listening.
Yeah.
I think that's really lacking in any space that adults touch.
Yes.
Right? Yes. It tends to be a step we largely avoid or pass over, when wading through conflict. And so it seems so simple, but I think it's a big part of the puzzle. And then the final thing that I think of here, and I also utilize this terminology with my students, is to become what I call an EBP pioneer. So an evidence-based practice pioneer. And the thought process here is, you give a student a fish, they eat for a day. You teach them the fish, they eat for a lifetime. And so thinking about not just what are evidence-based instructional practices, and that can be expanded beyond just EBPs, but it's an example, not only, what are evidence-based instructional practices, but how do you make independent decisions about evidence-based instructional practices? And what does the fluidity and the iterative nature of that actually look like? I think, I'll get asked a question about what would you recommend in this situation? And I always, what would you recommend? And students are very fearful to make independent decisions. And again, rightfully so, the stakes are really high.
Yeah.
This is progress for kids. I mean, this is really important stuff. And so they should be trepidatious. There should be a level of caution, right? These are important decisions, but I think teaching students how to make independent decisions is really important. I think about we do what we see. We're social learners, right? And so you pivot into an environment where maybe you're thinking, well, this is not what I learned about evidence-based practices in my pre-service program, right? And you have two options at that point. You either replicate the behavior that you see, or you pave your own way and you make your own independent decisions about it. And so I think teaching that skill, it's a very pivotal skill from my perspective to teach. And something that we really do have to focus on. Yeah.
What you said just made me think of philosophical doubt, right? Just the basic premise of science. Like, this is what I read, but the question, and how does it apply? How does that apply to my setting? And how do I adapt it and make it work for my setting, my students?
Yes.
But you gave so much rich information in that response, and it makes me think of teaching them contingency analysis just from the student perspective, but from the adult perspective as well. And then your example with the cell phone, not active listening. So scrolling on the cell phone instead of active listening made me think of like behavior skills training, right? So really getting in there. I do, we do, you do. In all of these different types of scenarios, like case study scenarios, things like that. So they get more opportunities to practice, what this might look like in real life.
And to our point from and to contact feedback, which is so powerful. Right. And especially when relationship is solidified, there's trust. The change you can make with effective feedback is, whoa, it's wild. It gets so simple.
Yet so simple. Exactly. That's it right there. So what leadership skills, Dr. Brown, the special educators need, right? But are really explicitly taught? And what changes would you propose to address this issue? It probably already said some of this in the previous question.
Yes.
Anything else to add?
So I think teaching independent decision making is absolutely critical. Another response or assumption that I get from students is there's this thought that there's only one answer to the question. Well, there most certainly is not. And I try to frame it as, we could have 10 IEP teams all focus on the same exact issue, and you might have 10 teams walk away with 10 completely different recommendations. It's about context, and so there isn't always a clear answer, and so really getting them to be independent decision makers, how to understand context, weigh evidence, understand data, utilize that to make decisions, and to recognize that this is often an iterative process. Very rarely are you going to get it right and perfect the first time. It just it doesn't work like that. And so independent decision making, that they are leaders to a great extent, I think they need to hear that language, just simply need to hear language that you are the leader of your classroom and of your space. And then finally, I think interdisciplinary collaboration and problem solving are equally really important skills that we need to be talking more about. We hear all the time, we work on interdisciplinary teams. Well, I think even transdisciplinary is, the level that we want to achieve, but, putting formal language aside, and thinking about working collaboratively with everyone on our team, putting ego on a shelf and being humble and active listening to others and marrying our ideas, respecting areas of expertise, including the family who is the expert on their kid. That is a skill that's hard to teach, I think, at the pre-service level. And then problem solving, because that's life is one big problem solving exercise.
It surely is. What comes to mind for me, Dr. Brown, is like, and you've experienced this too, but like sitting in IEP meetings, either as the teacher or the educator or just, someone observing, but the whole process of the meeting from the start. So the design, right? Your agenda, your norms, things like that. This is, this is a 45-minute meeting. First 10 minutes, we'll talk about, setting the stage from the beginning. But then, what I find very challenging is reeling people back in, right? And having the courage to do that. That's one of the areas that I see, we often support people with. But then even after the meeting, so being prepared with like your meeting summary email, whatever that's going to be, but like setting the stage and just designing everything, or task analysis, Dr. Brown.
Yes, there you go. That is actually really, honestly, really helpful for me, Dr. Bubb, to hear. And maybe we can even talk offline at some point about some of that, and I can really find a way to infuse, because those are the practical skills that I think students aren't exposed to. And And so I would love to carve out a space for that. That's excellent.
Another one is emotional regulation under pressure.
Oh, yeah. Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
And I think about that. Yeah. Like conflict, all of that kind of sits in that space of how to wade through conflict. There's a lot of avoidant behavior to our previous conversation, in alignment with that.
Yeah. So let's focus a bit on what a true reset really requires, right? So if you could redesign, Dr. Brown, the special education system, you were blessed with that opportunity. And you can do that using behavioral science, that I know is so special to you, and ethical leadership. What are the first 3 leadership or structural changes you would make?
Yeah, this is an excellent question. So and this is such a big question. I think, okay, so I'll start off with one of our initial points, which is attempting, and I certainly do not have the solution, but investigating and carving out the time to discover ways to shift from a compliance-driven system to a meaningfully student-centered system. I think that's at the heart of what I believe really has to happen here.
Yeah.
And I don't think, like, as a second point, I don't think that we can accomplish that alone. I think that it's really going to require us to lean into community, to have vulnerable, courageous conversations with families, with communities, with educators, right? Like, address the elephant in the room. There's a large level of family dissatisfaction with the system. We're seeing a large level of educator dissatisfaction with the system, hence the shortage, hence dispute resolution requests. So I think we have to sit at some of that. And my gut tells me that what's at the core of that is that, that meaningful student learning and growth piece. I don't think that we're fully achieving it the way that we wish we were, the way that we intend to.
Yeah.
And so that, for me, I think is the heart of a reset. I think we have to, again, we are very compliance driven, but we are also compliance sophisticated in a lot of ways. We've made a lot of growth. We collect a lot of really valuable, meaningful information, and I'd like to see us start to pivot a bit to invest more heavily, on individual student outcomes. And again, I certainly cannot sit here and say that I have the solution to that problem. I don't, but I think, again, that we have a very powerful, very talented, intelligent, thoughtful community. And so, I'd like to see us to lean into some of that. And again, to go back to one final point from earlier. I don't think we've mastered the formula yet for how to sustain meaningful progress across contexts. And, I think there's a space for researchers to lean to more into the, so it's not just the what, it's the how. I think if we can lean a little bit more into that, it would be helpful.
Yeah. I think it makes me think also to Dr. Brown, you talked about advocacy earlier, right? In a safe space. And I think we have to start publicly reinforcing, publicly recognizing courageous advocacy, right? So like I might have a check-in, a one-to-one, and really, really celebrate my staff for doing that, for bringing it to light, but like making it public, as long as they're okay with it, right? Because not everyone, really wants the public acknowledgement, so that everybody knows, right? And sort of then that culture starts to shift to one where people are freer and believe and have faith in, speaking up. And changing
absolutely.
Systems. What contingencies would need to shift, Dr. Brown, so that things like honesty, collaboration, and database decision making are constantly reinforced? Kind of, I guess I just segued into that question with my previous comments.
We did beautifully. I mean, we have to redesign contingencies if we want to shift. If we want to shift what we're seeing. And so I think if we want honesty, we want decision making, database decision making, we want to see, we really have to focus on student-centered learning and individual student outcomes. I think that it seems so simple, but I keep coming back to sort of the same, rather than reinforcing paperwork completion, we're reinforcing and celebrating actual student progress and growth in a meaningful way. And I think that that's a major piece here.
And you talked about punishment earlier. So how do we move from compliance-driven systems to learning-driven systems without punishing the people doing the work? Behaviorally speaking.
I think, again, for me, what comes up here is the blame, the concept of blame defensiveness that arises a lot here. It really does. And so I think we have to we have to understand that first and foremost, that we punish honesty, we punish database decision making and those sorts of things in leadership and systemic response to that. And so, I think it's just a matter of, again, acknowledging it, recognizing it. And how do we do that? We have to pause a little bit. There's just, there's so much urgency and so many good intentions that we're not reading, I think, the space. Yeah.
What about policies, Dr. Brown, or accountability mechanisms? How do they need to change to realign incentives with student-centered outcomes?
I think here, and this may sound sort of simple too, the way that we monitor compliance, I think we have to pivot from metrics, which aren't necessarily meaningful. Mm-hmm. And it's easy for data to be manipulated. And I don't necessarily mean the word manipulated in the traditional sense where, the Oz is behind the scene, moving the pieces around. I just simply mean that, quantitative data, it can sometimes, again, not paint a full picture of what's happening. And so if we can find a way to shift compliance monitoring to be more individualized, to be more student focused. Again, I think about how we celebrate individual behavior change in single case design. Yeah. How do we replicate some of those structures in the educational space in a way that's, of course, feasible and realistic? It's easy to get ideological here, but think about in, realistic and feasible ways. And again, I certainly do not have the answer to that question. I would love to be involved in the group that starts talking about it. Yeah. But that's sort of a basic, I think we need to see shifts there. Yeah.
So Dr. Brown, as a behavior analyst, right, you're a special educator, you're an administrator, professor. How can, people with all of these hats, right, really collaborate to redesign systems that reinforce access, reinforce progress, and reinforce equity?
I also had wonderful mentors in my life that say teamwork makes the dream work, and it sounds but I think we do have to convene all perspectives and and come together, and it has to be in a structure in which change is actually possible. I think there has to be an acknowledgement that change is possible, because we have a lot of conversations, I think, that also don't go anywhere. To your point of earlier, we have a lot of conversations that don't necessarily, spark change or support change. I think there needs to be a climate that recognizes first and foremost that change is necessary, right? And then we convene a group of varied-minded individuals to start the conversation and start talking about it, with the promise that change is possible and that there's an expectation of action. Yeah.
Yeah. So we should revisit often and revise early, and we can do that if we have those collaborative meetings and we set them up intentionally, right, to do that.
Yes. That's an excellent word. They have to be intentional conversations.
Yeah. Okay. So let's begin to close out our conversation for today, Dr. Brown. So for leaders listening, right? So superintendents, principals, directors, educators, others, what is one behavior they could start reinforcing tomorrow that would meaningfully improve special education outcomes?
Maybe I want to say transparency and honesty. Right? Like, reinforcing staff coming to you with an instructional concern. This kiddo is just not making progress and I can't figure it out. Yeah. Right. So I think reinforcing transparency and honesty, reinforcing a team approach. Those are some really simple things that I think we have the power to do today. Yes. And the ability to do today that we can, that will make shifts, that will have ripple effects.
Yeah. I think one that comes to mind is like family validation. Just easy and simple, right?
Yes. Yeah. So important. Yeah. It is important.
Yeah. Yeah. What does it mean, Dr. Brown, in practice to lead special education, with courage, with compassion, with humility, and with behavioral insight?
Yeah. So I just took a quick peek at my notes here and I'm smiling. I think courageous leadership looks like active listening. I think we have to be humble enough as leaders, right? There's always a personal element associated with it. There's an ego piece associated with things not going as planned or things not going well in your program or, whatever your reach is. And so I think that we have to, again, reset, pause, engage in active listening, validate our families, hear from our families, and not just hear the words that they're saying, to your previous point, really hear the message, right? My kid is not doing, my kid's not making progress. My kid is not safe. All of those are messages that live below the surface, right? And I think about, like, to your point from earlier, requests for personal care assistance. If you talk to a family enough, a family that is very confident that, like, well, I know my child needs a one-to-one assistant. My child, if you have a genuine conversation and you can dig deep enough, you typically always get to something like, I'm afraid. My kid is not safe. My kid is not learning. My child is not socially accepted. Whatever it is under there. If we can start listening to some of that and then honestly apply that same concept to our teachers. Why do we have folks leaving the field in droves? Why does the pipeline feel dry in comparison? I think about a decade ago, we saw on average, I hope I don't butcher this because we are recording, about 21,000 in our state individuals obtaining level 1 certification every year. I think it's about, and now we're hovering at about 6,000, I believe. I could be slightly off, but in the general ballpark enough to get a feel for the massive decrease. And
that's significant. Wow.
It's significant. So I think, leadership in a lot of ways, courageous leadership is active listening. It's being uncomfortable and being okay with that for a period of time. And then I think finally it's being present. And I think that goes along with everything that we just said. You have to be uncomfortable with the uncomfortable. And a lot of that is being present in the space.
I like that, Dr. Brown. It makes me think of, something I work on and continue to work on is becoming comfortable with being uncomfortable with acknowledging when you make mistakes, right?
Oh, yes.
So
modeling
owning up to it, right? Acknowledging it, just being honest about it, having the courage to do that. But I think it also involves compassion, because recognizing that my mistake impacted someone, impacted a staff member, a child, a family, being humble enough to say that I made a mistake, right? But having the behavioral insight to recognize that my error, my mistake, impacts the behaviors of others, right? And I think that's something, if us as leaders could do, it's such an excellent example for others, just being honest, right? To acknowledge when we make mistakes, but then being accountable and doing something about it, right? How do I move forward? What do I need to change?
It's so profound. It really is. I mean, we're only human, right? I'm merely a human being. And I will share this too, because it changed me in so many ways. A mentor of mine, I'm speaking a lot about my mentor. I've had the privilege of working with incredible mentors in my career. I have. And, one of them had said to me before, Ash, there's no magic at the top. Right? There's just human beings beings with biases and experiences that influence the decisions that they make. Sorry about that.
No problem.
We are, there's no magic at the top, right? We are just human beings and human beings with flaws and biases and experiences that shape the decisions that we make. And we're going to make errors and we're going to win and we're going to have successes too. But so I think an acknowledgement of that, a modeling of that is powerful.
What gives you hope, Dr. Brown? What gives you hope that a true system reset is possible?
I am going to lean back into this community. when I say I'm honored to be a part of it, my goodness, I really mean that. This community is diverse. It's talented. We have so many perspectives. I think about our state and the advocacy groups and the legal entities and the educators and the administrators. I mean, the families, there is a very diverse, very beautiful, very talented, intelligent, thoughtful team. And so I think the hope lies in this community. And this community coming together for good.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%, Dr. Brown. The families, the educators, the students, the children, they keep showing up.
Yes, every
day, because we have something to offer, because we give them hope, right? And I think research, you engage in a lot of research or things like that. We have young educators, so we're seeing decline. We still have some. We have increased transparency. So those are some of the things, and conversations like this give me hope.
Yes,
right?
Me too.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So what are 3 takeaways to close us out finally, Dr. Brown? What are 3 takeaways you want listeners to walk away with from our conversation today?
Yeah. So I think the first would be sort of the premise of our conversation, that systems shape behavior. And it's okay to acknowledge that. It's okay to say that out loud in spirit of bringing it to light and changing it. Mm-hmm. I think that's the first one.
Systems shape behavior.
Yeah. I think the second is, I do want to have folks leave with a celebration for the progress that we have made. I do. We have made incredible progress and incredible growth, and it's okay to celebrate that. At the same time, we're acknowledging there's still room for improvement.
Yeah. Yes.
You can do those things at the same time.
Yeah.
So I hope folks, especially educators or family, walk away from this conversation with a little bit of celebration and admiration and pride, and for the work that's been done, with an equal acknowledgement that we still have work to do, and that's okay.
Yeah, and that's okay. Exactly.
Yeah, and that's okay. Yeah. And then I think the final thing is, I hope. How do I want to say this? Maybe that we have to pay attention to the noise a little bit. So there are elements of our system that are screaming, pay attention to me. We have to change, the workforce data, dispute resolution, voices from families, even kids. I mean, we're hearing more and more about behavior again as one of the most prevalent challenges in schools today. Yeah. Behavior is communication. We're hearing, and I would argue it's getting louder and louder.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
Right. And so it's definitely the time for us to pay homage to that, to acknowledge that, and to be bold and courageous and start having conversations to re-envision or reset and think about how, we keep the elements of our system that have served us so well and are so important, like access and LRE and parental participation, absolutely critical. How do we maintain those elements, but reset areas of our system that warrant movement? Yeah.
Yeah. Dr. Brown, thank you so much for your time. Right, it was a lovely conversation. Lots of good nuggets. I can't wait for our listeners to hear it. As always, I appreciate your expertise, your humility.
Oh,
big on humility. And just your eagerness to always support whatever the cause of the mission is. So thank you.
Well, Dr. Bubb, it has been an honor and a pleasure. And the feeling is absolutely mutual. I have such deep respect for this work that I know you do in your free time amongst your many, many other responsibilities and tasks, and your leadership in the field. You amaze me, and I'm in awe of your work in many, many ways. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to be here.
You're very welcome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Behaviorally Speaking, Leadership for Changemakers. And Dr. Brown, thank you for sharing your experiences on today's episode. As we close, I want to leave you with this reflection. Leadership lives in our daily behavior, in how we listen, how we respond, and how we create space for others to grow. Today, Dr. Brown reminded us that the signals inside special education systems are speaking loudly. Perhaps the most powerful insight from today's conversation is this: If leadership structures the contingencies, leadership also has the power to redesign them. If you have a story about leadership and behavior from your community, share your story with us. If this episode resonated, share it with someone, and check out our companion blog, Behaviorally Speaking, Insights for Changemakers at esthercbubbaviaservices.com/blog. Until next time, lead with humanity and purpose, practice with compassion and intention, and create meaningful, lasting change. This is Dr. Bubb. Stay inspired.